What if the greatest library of human knowledge is not resting behind glass in a museum, but sealed in darkness, miles beneath our feet? For centuries, we have searched upward for signs of intelligence. We have aimed telescopes into the cold distance, listened for signals between stars, and imagined that advanced life must come from somewhere beyond the sky. But perhaps part of the story lies in the opposite direction, not above us, but below us. Across the world, beneath deserts, mountains, temples, forests, and cities, there are chambers that seem to challenge the simple story of human progress. Some are vast enough to shelter entire populations. Some are cut with a precision that feels strangely modern. Others echo with acoustic properties, legends, or unanswered reports that refuse to settle into ordinary explanation. None of this proves that a prehistoric high-tech civilization once ruled the Earth. The evidence is incomplete, uneven, and often tangled with myth. But the persistence of these places raises a quieter question. Why did so many ancient people go underground with such intensity, skill, and purpose? In this journey, we will descend into 10 subterranean worlds where stone, silence, and memory meet. We will move from Turkey's underground fortresses to India's polished granite chambers, from the crystal depths of Mexico to the disputed legends of New Mexico. And as the light fades behind us, one thought will follow us down. Perhaps the past was never as primitive as we were taught to imagine. The first descent begins in central Turkey, where the landscape above seems almost gentle. The region of Cappadocia is known for soft volcanic stone, wind-carved towers, and valleys that glow gold in the late afternoon. But beneath that quiet surface lies Derinkuyu, an underground city deep enough to make daylight feel like a memory. Its tunnels drop through multiple levels, widening into rooms, storage chambers, wells, schools, stables, and places of worship. What makes Derinkuyu so haunting is not simply its size. It is the sense of planning. Ventilation shafts carry air through the depths with surprising efficiency. Massive circular stone doors could be rolled into place to seal passages from invasion. These were not decorative gestures. They were survival mechanisms. Some researchers view Derinkuyu as a refuge built over many generations, used by communities hiding from war or persecution. That explanation is reasonable. Yet even within that frame, the engineering remains remarkable. To keep thousands alive below ground requires more than fear. It requires knowledge of airflow, food storage, water protection, and controlled movement through confined space. There is something deeply human about Derinkuyu. It is not a monument built to impress the sky. It is architecture built to protect breath itself. And perhaps that is why it feels like the right place to begin. Because before we ask whether ancient people possessed lost technologies, we must first ask what kind of world would force them to master the underground so completely. In China's Zhejiang province, the Longyou caves do not feel like natural hollows. They feel arranged, measured, cut with intention. Discovered only in the late 20th century after local villagers drained ponds that had long hidden their entrances, the caves opened into enormous man-made chambers. The walls, pillars, and ceilings were covered with repeated marks, running in disciplined patterns across the stone. To some eyes, they resemble chisel work. To others, the regularity suggests something more systematic, almost mechanical. The mystery deepens with scale. Vast quantities of stone appear to have been removed, yet the expected piles of waste rock have not been clearly identified nearby. That absence does not prove the use of unknown machines. Ancient labor forces could move material in ways that leave few obvious traces after centuries. But the question remains difficult to ignore. Where did all that stone go? Longyou is not a city in the ordinary sense. It does not present streets, homes, or domestic rooms the way Derinkuyu does. It feels more like a subterranean work site, or a ceremonial interior, or a structure whose function has slipped beyond easy interpretation. The silence inside such a place has a peculiar weight. Every carved surface suggests repeated labor. Every pillar suggests calculation. Every shadow seems to ask whether we are looking at human persistence, forgotten technique, or both. And in that uncertainty, Longyou becomes more than an archaeological puzzle. It becomes a mirror, reflecting how quickly we underestimate hands we never saw. Some mysteries begin not with stone, but with a story. In Ecuador, the Taos Caves have long drawn explorers, writers, soldiers, and seekers of lost knowledge. Their tunnels extend into the earth beneath jungle terrain, where darkness gathers in layers and every sound seems older than language. Over time, reports emerged of unusual stone formations, artificial-looking passages, and most famously, a so-called metal library, golden or metallic plates said to be engraved with symbols of science, history, or forgotten wisdom. The problem is that the strongest claims remain disputed. The physical evidence has never been established in a way that would satisfy careful scholarship. Accounts differ. Testimonies blur into legend. The cave becomes not only a place underground, but a place where fact and imagination overlap. And yet, even disputed stories can reveal something important. The idea of a metal library speaks to a very old human longing, the hope that somewhere beyond fire, flood, decay, and empire, knowledge has survived. Not as rumor, not as myth, but as a record that can still be read. Whether Taos contains such a library is uncertain. What is undeniable is the power of the image, a chamber in the dark. Plates that do not rot. Symbols waiting for a future generation capable of understanding them. Perhaps the true mystery is not whether the library exists exactly as described. Perhaps it is why so many cultures imagine wisdom being hidden underground when the surface becomes too dangerous to trust. At Ellora in India, the descent is strangely reversed. Kailasa Temple was not built upward from a foundation. It was carved downward from a single mass of rock. This means the builders began at the top and removed the mountain around the temple, liberating architecture from stone as if it had been waiting inside all along. The achievement is difficult to absorb. Columns, courtyards, towers, shrines, stairways, and sculpted walls emerge from one continuous rock body. Traditional explanations point to extraordinary planning, skilled artisans, and generations of disciplined labor. That alone is enough to inspire awe. But for those who explore the possibility of lost technologies, Kailasa raises a provocative question. How did ancient builders remove such an immense volume of stone with such coherence, without fatally miscalculating the final form? Some have speculated about thermal methods, sonic techniques, or forms of stone-cutting knowledge now forgotten. These ideas remain speculative. The evidence does not require machines beyond history, but the precision does require respect. Kailasa reminds us that high technology is not always metal, circuitry, or engines. Sometimes it is organization. Sometimes it is geometry held perfectly in the mind. Sometimes it is the ability to coordinate human effort across years with a clarity that modern observers struggle to imagine. There is a humility in standing before such work. We may ask whether something has been lost, but we must also admit that ancient hands, guided by patience and vision, were capable of making stone behave like memory. Beneath the Giza plateau, the imagination has always found room to wander. Above ground, the pyramids and the Sphinx stand in sunlight, measured, photographed, debated, and revisited by generation after generation. But below that familiar horizon lies another Giza, one made of shafts, cavities, passages, chambers, and contested interpretations. Ground-penetrating radar, seismic studies, and other surveys have encouraged discussion about hidden voids and underground features, though many claims remain unresolved. For mainstream archaeology, these spaces belong to a complex funerary and ritual landscape shaped by ancient Egyptian religion and royal power. For alternative theorists, Giza may have functioned as something more technical, a vast energy system, a resonant machine, or a landscape designed according to principles we have not fully recovered. The power plant theory remains speculative. It should not be treated as established fact. Yet the persistence of the idea tells us something about Giza itself. The architecture is so mathematically disciplined, so symbolically charged, and so physically enduring that people continue to suspect it was designed to do more than house the dead. Perhaps that suspicion comes from our own age. We live among machines, grids, frequencies, and invisible forces. When we look at ancient precision, we instinctively search for function. But Giza may resist that separation. To the ancient mind, power, death, heaven, stone, and kingship may not have been separate categories. They may have been one system, built not merely underground or above ground, but between worlds. Long before modern maps gave names to every canyon and mesa, stories were already carrying memory across the American Southwest. Among the Hopi, there are traditions that speak of emergence, of previous worlds, and of beings sometimes described in popular retellings as ant people, who helped humans survive periods of destruction beneath the earth. These stories have been interpreted in many ways, as sacred teachings, as symbolic memory, as moral cosmology, and by some speculative writers, as possible traces of ancient subterranean refuge. Across North America, there are indeed cave systems, lava tubes, shelters, and underground spaces that can protect against heat, cold, storms, and radiation from sunlight. In a time of environmental crisis, going underground would not be irrational. It would be practical. But we must be careful. Indigenous traditions are not puzzle pieces waiting to be forced into modern theories. They are living cultural inheritances, with meanings that belong first to the people who preserve them. The value of these stories is not merely whether they can be converted into evidence. Still, they open an important thought. Human beings have survived catastrophe before. Floods, fires, droughts, eruptions, and sudden changes in climate have shaped memory in ways that may echo for thousands of years. If some ancient communities built underground shelters, perhaps they were not hiding from mystery. Perhaps they were doing what humans have always done when the surface becomes uncertain, protecting children, food, language, and hope until the world becomes livable again. Some underground legends are not tied to one cave or city, but to an entire hidden world. Agartha, in its many versions, is imagined as a realm beneath the surface of the earth, sometimes connected to polar openings, internal suns, and civilizations untouched by ordinary history. It belongs more to esoteric geography than confirmed archaeology. Yet it persists because it gives shape to a powerful idea, that the earth itself may contain hidden interiors, not only of rock, but of possibility. Stories surrounding polar exploration have sometimes been drawn into this mythology. Admiral Richard Byrd's expeditions, real and historically important, have been surrounded by later claims and interpretations that go far beyond the verified record. Some people point to unusual polar phenomena, magnetic behavior, or thermal anomalies, and imagine vast cavities below the ice. Scientifically, the hollow Earth model is not supported by modern geology. We understand much about the planet's layered structure through seismic data, but myths do not always survive because they are physically accurate. Sometimes they survive because they express emotional truths. The poles are remote, luminous, and difficult to inhabit. They appear at the edges of maps, where certainty thins. To imagine hidden entrances there is to imagine that the known world still has thresholds. Agartha may not be a place we can locate with instruments, but as a symbol, it asks a question that archaeology also asks in a more grounded way. How much of our world remains unseen simply because we have never learned where to look? In India's Barabar Hills, the caves do not overwhelm with size, they overwhelm with finish. Cut into hard granite more than 2,000 years ago, the Barabar Caves contain interiors polished to a mirror-like smoothness. Their walls curve with quiet precision. Their surfaces reflect light in a way that feels almost liquid. When sound enters these chambers, it behaves strangely, stretching and returning with a resonance that can make the body feel the room before the mind understands it. The mainstream explanation is already extraordinary. These caves are associated with ancient Indian religious traditions and are among the earliest surviving examples of rock-cut architecture in the region. The Polish demonstrates remarkable craftsmanship and technical discipline, but their acoustic qualities have invited further speculation. Some researchers and independent investigators have wondered whether the chambers were designed for chanting, meditation, healing, communication, or vibrational effects. These possibilities are difficult to prove, but not unreasonable to consider carefully. Ancient builders often understood sound through experience, ritual, and repeated observation, even without modern acoustic theory. Barabar challenges our narrow definition of technology. If a chamber can shape sound, alter perception, and focus attention, is it only a room, or is it an instrument? Perhaps the ancients did not separate engineering from inner life the way we often do. Perhaps stone, voice, and silence were part of one design. And if that is true, then the most advanced feature of Barabar may not be its polish. It may be the way it turns emptiness into presence. Deep beneath the desert of northern Mexico, the Naica crystal caves seem less constructed than revealed. Here, enormous selenite crystals rise through heated darkness like frozen beams of light. Some are longer than trees. Their clarity and scale feel almost unreal, yet they are natural formations, shaped by mineral-rich water, heat, pressure, and time. The environment is so extreme that humans can remain inside only briefly without protection. Naica is not a prehistoric city. It is not carved into orderly rooms. It does not show evidence of ancient machines humming in the dark. And yet, in a documentary journey about subterranean high technology, it belongs for a different reason. It shows that the Earth itself can create structures more precise, more strange, and more powerful than anything we might expect. Some speculative interpretations imagine such crystal environments as natural processors, energy conduits, or sites that ancient miners may have understood in ways we have not recovered. These ideas remain possibilities, not conclusions. But the crystals do possess properties that make them symbolically compelling: structure, resonance, conductivity in broader mineral contexts, and the visible record of slow geological intelligence. Naica invites a reversal. Instead of asking whether ancient people built high technology underground, we might ask whether underground environments taught them new ways of thinking. To stand before those crystals is to feel time made visible, not human time, measured in rains and ruins, but planetary time, patient and immense. And perhaps any civilization that entered such a chamber would come away changed, carrying the memory of a world that seemed to be thinking in stone. In New Mexico, the story becomes more modern, more uncertain, and more difficult to separate from rumor. The Dulce enigma centers on allegations of deep underground facilities near Dulce, a small community close to the Colorado border. Over the years, stories have circulated about military installations, advanced technologies, non-human intelligences, and hidden levels beneath the desert landscape. Some versions connect these claims to so-called DUMBs, or deep underground military bases. It is important to say clearly, the strongest claims surrounding Dulce have not been verified by reliable public evidence. They exist largely in the realm of testimony, speculation, and modern legend. But dismissing the story entirely may cause us to miss why it endures. Dulce is a bridge between ancient subterranean myths and contemporary anxieties. In older stories, people went underground to survive gods, floods, fires, or collapsing worlds. In modern stories, the underground becomes a place of classified research, advanced weapons, hidden laboratories, and technology beyond public view. The setting has changed, but the emotional structure is familiar. We sense that power often moves out of sight. We know that governments and militaries do build underground facilities for protection, secrecy, and continuity. From that real foundation, imagination expands into the unknown. Dulce may not prove ancient technology merging with modern systems, but it reveals something about us. Even in an age of satellites and open information, we still believe the deepest rooms are the ones where history is being decided without us. When the 10 stories are placed side by side, a pattern begins to appear. Derinkuyu protects breath. Longyou preserves the mystery of labor. Taios imagines knowledge made durable. Kailasa releases architecture from the mountain. Giza binds earth and sky through geometry. Hopi traditions remember survival below. Agartha turns the planet into myth. Barabar makes stone sing. Naica reveals the intelligence of minerals. Dulce carries the old fear of hidden power into the modern age. They are not all the same kind of evidence. Some are archaeological sites. Some are sacred traditions. Some are natural wonders. Some are speculative narratives with uncertain foundations. To treat them as equal proof would be careless, but to ignore their shared direction would also be too simple. Again and again, the underground appears as shelter, archive, machine, temple, womb, and threshold. It is where human beings place what they cannot afford to lose, and where they imagine what they are not yet ready to understand. Perhaps the deeper question is not whether one prehistoric civilization possessed all the technologies we dream about today. Perhaps the question is whether human history has been more cyclical than we like to believe. Civilizations rise, knowledge gathers, disasters come. What survives is rarely the whole library. Sometimes it is only a tunnel, a polished wall, a legend, a misplaced chamber, a stone door that still rolls shut. And from those fragments, we attempt to reconstruct not only what happened, but what kind of beings we once were. Why would anyone choose to build downward? The surface is where sunlight lives. It is where crops grow, cities expand, and monuments meet the horizon. Yet again and again, human beings have turned away from the open world and entered the earth. Sometimes they were hiding from enemies. Sometimes they were storing food or water. Sometimes they were worshiping, burying, listening, healing, or waiting. One possible explanation is catastrophe. Many cultures preserve memories of floods, fires, darkened skies, or world-ending changes. Geological history also reminds us that Earth is not a stable stage. Volcanic winters, impacts, solar events, earthquakes, and climate shifts have shaped the conditions of life. Underground spaces offer insulation, protection, and continuity. Another possibility is symbolic. To descend is to return to origin. The cave is one of humanity's first shelters, one of its first canvases, one of its first temples. Before the tower, before the palace, before the cathedral, there was the chamber in the dark where firelight moved across stone. And then there is the most speculative possibility, that some forms of knowledge were intentionally preserved below because the surface could not be trusted, not necessarily suppressed by some single hidden group, but buried by time, disaster, conquest, and forgetting. The uncomfortable truth is that knowledge does not vanish all at once. It erodes. It becomes ritual. It becomes myth. It becomes architecture whose purpose is remembered only as reverence. Maybe the underground is not where history ended. Maybe it is where history waited. We began with a question. What if the greatest library of human knowledge is not above ground, but beneath our feet? After descending through these 10 places, the answer remains unresolved. And perhaps that is appropriate. The underground rarely gives itself away easily. It offers fragments, echoes, rooms without labels, surfaces worn smooth by hands we cannot name. Some of these sites show confirmed human brilliance. Others are wrapped in legend, speculation, or disputed interpretation. Some may point to lost techniques. Some may simply reveal how patient, organized, and imaginative ancient people truly were. But together, they ask us to look at the past with less arrogance. It is tempting to imagine one grand answer: a breakaway civilization, a hidden archive, a suppressed technology, a world beneath the world. But history is often stranger and more human than a single explanation. It is made of survival, fear, devotion, curiosity, labor, and the endless desire to leave something behind. Maybe the most important technology was not sonic cutting, crystal energy, or underground machinery. Maybe it was memory itself, the ability to carry knowledge through darkness until another generation could find it. So the next time we look upward, searching the stars for intelligence, we might also pause and look down. Beneath the roads, fields, deserts, temples, and mountains, the earth is still holding its silence. And somewhere in that silence, the past may not be gone. It may simply be waiting for us to listen more carefully.